Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 K-State Garden Hour series. If this is your first time joining us, we welcome you. If you're a regular, we're so glad that you're back with us today as we kicked off the season here in February, and this is our second presentation of the year. And we're so excited to be talking today about the best plants for the landscape. This series is hosted by K-State Research Extension. And my name is Dennis Patton, and I am the horticulture agent here in Johnson County, Kansas. This webinar series has allowed us to provide online educational program relating to horticulture and gardening in an innovative and engaging way. Everyone involved in these presentations are associated with K-State Extension, and we have a background in horticulture education or related disciplines. But most of all, we're just garden nerds. We like to garden and enjoy the natural environment, as I'm sure most of you do too. And as you participated before, you know these are fun and interactive sessions. So before we get started, just a few ground rules to go over today. Please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of the taskbar to put your questions in today for our guest speaker. And we'll be answering those throughout the presentation and then at the end. Once you've typed in your question, just hit enter and it'll pop up for us. Our moderator today is Cassie Holman with Post Rock District, and she will be trying to answer as many questions as well as others with Extension. We're going to be recording today's webinar, and it'll be recorded and be uploaded to our website so you can go back and review and take notes. Also, we have previous webinars recorded from this year and from 2020 if you want to go back and look over additional webinars we've had. And if you want to like or share this so more people learn about it, please use hashtag K-State Garden Hour to help promote the program. And today's topic is best plants for the beginning landscape. And I'm pleased today that we have one of our newest members of the Extension team with us, Anthony Reardon, the horticulture agent in West Plains District, which covers Finney and Scott counties in Kansas. And Anthony is based in Finney County. He's a graduate of K-State Horticulture Program and has a specialty in landscape management. And before joining Extension, he worked with the city horticulture for several years, designing, installing, and maintaining landscapes in Southwest Kansas. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter today and let him get started with the topic you've all come for today.
All right, well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Let me get my slides going here. All right, so as Dennis touched on there, my role in KSRE is relatively new. I started back in November. This is going on my 5th month now. But before that, I worked for basically the majority of my 20s as a city horticulturist. I did that here in Kansas, and I don't know if you guys know anything about Kansas weather, but it's extremely hard to grow things here. We have extremely harsh temperature fluctuations here. We rarely get rain, and wind, especially in Western Kansas, is extremely hard to deal with. So know that with all of the plants that I'm recommending to you guys today, I have the personal experience working with them. I know these plants survive in Kansas. So let's talk about what makes a beginner's garden, excuse me. What I think of when I think of this is low maintenance. I'm looking for plants that need very little attention to take care of, nothing that needs to be babied. I'm also looking for low water requirements. Different plants require different amounts of water, obviously, but you don't want to be in your garden all day trying to water plants. So really those once a day plants or even less are really kind of what you're going to want to be striving for. I want plants that are hard to kill. Many plants actually thrive on neglect, especially ones that you're going to want to plant around Kansas. Some will even grow back from their root systems if you were to accidentally kill it off. So there's a few of those plants in this presentation that I'll be talking about. And then I want plants that are hardy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the USDA cold hardiness zones, but if you're not, Kansas is mainly in zone 6. That means that our average lowest temperature is 0 degrees. So that means that anything within, excuse me. So that means that with any like labels that you're reading for plants, what you're going to be looking at is, or what you're going to be recommended is zones 3 through 8, 2 through 9, random, not necessarily random. I'm sorry, Cassie, can you jump in here for a second? Whoops.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, what you're looking at with cold hardiness zones, basically, if you're seeing a label that says 3 through 9, 4 through 10, what have you, you're going to want your zone to be in those, within those ranges. That helps you to know what plants will survive within the temperature range here. Whoops, my notes aren't changing over. Hold on. Okay. And then you're going to also want to be paying attention to environmental factors, because that cold hardiness zone thing isn't an end all be all. As I mentioned, here in Kansas, it's very windy, especially in the western parts. We have very alkaline soil here. So if you have plants that require a acidic soil, they might not be able to survive. As far as water goes, we're pretty much in a drought every other week. So that's that's something you're going to want to be paying attention to as well. And then even nutrients, here in Kansas, I know iron deficiency can be a big issue. So a lot of plants will need that additional fertilization to survive. Then also when you're looking at your plants, you're going to want to pay attention to light requirements. It will usually list directly on the label, whether it's full sun, part shade, or shade. Full sun, you're looking at 6 to 8 hours a day of direct sunlight. And then part shade, it's 4 to 6 hours a day of direct sunlight. And then shade, you're looking at even less. You're definitely going to need at least a little bit of light for plants to be surviving in shade, but as long as it's not no light whatsoever, you should be good. Side note on this, we are having another garden hour on April 21st that is specifically about shade plants, so I'm not really going to get into those in this presentation. Mostly going to be talking about full sun and part shade plants. Then, when you're taking all of this into consideration, you're also going to want to have garden design in mind. There are a few factors that I like to pay attention to here. Height, plant heights and shapes being one of them. You want to guide people's eyes from the front to the back. So a good way to do that is to have your low plants up front, then your medium plants in the middle, and then your tall plants in the background. And then you can incorporate your specimen plants that are special interest to catch people's eyes. You're also going to pay attention to the number of plants that are being included in your landscape. So what I say with this is we typically try to plant in odd numbers. That's because it looks more natural. When you plant in even numbers, that's when you start to create squares, octagons. Those don't really occur in nature very often. So definitely keep that in mind. And then you want to pay attention to textures. A good example I give with this is, if nothing is in flower in your garden and everything has the exact same leaf, it's all going to look the same, regardless if it's 2 feet tall or 20 feet tall. So differentiating the leaves, the foliage that you have in your garden will definitely help out with that. And then there's color scheme. A good rule of thumb with this is if you wouldn't pair 2 colors together when you're wearing them, it's probably also not going to look too good in your garden. That said, we do have typical things that we like to abide by when we're doing this. So there's your warm colors and your cool colors. Your cool colors are going to be your whites, blues, purples, and light pinks. And then your warm colors are going to be reds, oranges, yellows, and bright pinks. And then one thing I think that I think tends to be overlooked is seasonal interest. When people plant their gardens, I know they typically think about spring and they think about summer because that's when everything's green and blooming. But you can also take fall and winter into consideration. Fall, there are a lot of plants that specifically have bright red foliage or bright whatever foliage that can definitely liven up your landscape. And then winter, you might not be getting as much color, but you will be getting textures. So you've got grasses, you've got even crab apples with berries that they retain. You've got certain plants that will keep their form throughout the winter. So with all that said, I want to jump into deciduous shrubs first. I think this is one of the easiest ways to incorporate color into your landscape because a lot of these are very, very low maintenance. If you plant them in the right spots, you should almost never have to touch them as long as you're keeping them watered. So let's start off with purple beautyberry. This is a low-growing shrub. It has long cascading branches that kind of arch over and reach the ground. You can find these berries in pink, purple, or white. Those berries usually show up in August, and then they last throughout the fall, and sometime during the winter, they'll start falling off. My past maintenance experience with this has been that you really don't have to touch it if it is planted in the right spot. If you've got it next to, say, a driveway or a sidewalk, then that's when you're gonna have to get into trimming it because it will try to spread on you. It will get kind of large. So those cascading branches can tend to get in the way. Butterfly bush is another great option for you as far as hardy shrubs go. Uh, Obviously, it attracts butterflies. I don't think I've ever seen one in bloom that wasn't covered in butterflies. So if you're looking to do a pollinator garden, great option for you. You do want to keep in mind with this one that it does tend to have sort of spindly growth. The flowers sort of grow in every which direction. So that's definitely something you want to keep in mind when you're choosing where to put it in your landscape. If you've got a very finely kept garden, this may not look very natural in there. So it's more so for naturalistic landscapes. Also along the lines of pollinator plants, Bluebeard is an excellent option. It blooms late summer. And I have seen these covered in hundreds of painted ladies before. Those are butterflies. It's very, very low maintenance, gets to 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide. Maintenance wise, the only thing you have to do with this is try to trim it back right after it blooms because it blooms on new growth. So right around September, October, you'd want to cut it back about a foot. And then getting back into that seasonal interest topic I was just talking about, burning bush, a great option for your fall landscapes. This big picture you're seeing on the right here is the bush in fall. Obviously, turns a bright, bright red. These barely have to be touched, but they do get very, very large. So if you don't want a 10-foot wide shrub in front of your house, consider planting a dwarf variety instead. Then again, along the lines of seasonal interest, this is more so along the lines of your spring interest. This is one of the, forsythia, excuse me, is one of the very first things to bloom in the spring. You will actually, within the coming weeks, see these blooming. They are interesting for a while they're blooming, but then they don't exactly look great afterwards. So a good tip I have with these is just to put them in a place where they are not necessarily the focal point of your landscape. In the backgrounds where you can have color once a year is probably a better option. Then we also have red twig dogwood. This would be a winter interest. As you can see, it does flower, but the flowers are not necessarily very showy. You can almost not see them. But when the foliage falls off and then it is wintertime, you will see these bright red stems. Maintenance wise with this, again, it's very, very minimal. The one thing you do want to keep in mind here is at the end of winter, you'll want to trim out your old dead wood because that isn't as vibrant and bright as your new wood. Van Hoot spirea is actually one of my favorite shrubs. It does get significantly large, but not too large compared to others. Right at the end of May, I believe, or all May, you're going to see it covered in these flowers. And then once those flowers fade away, it still has like a nice tiny ovate leaf that covers the whole thing. And it's got these sort of long cascading branches. This is another one you will not have to touch unless you put it in a spot where it needs to be trimmed. So definitely plan wisely. Panicle hydrangea, these can get very large, but there's also varieties that are 4x4, which are much more apt to be put into a typical landscape. It can be kind of tricky maintaining these, but not necessarily. You just have to choose the right spots. So it needs to be a semi-protected area, no harsh winds, and no intense cold or heat. Oak leaf hydrangea is another one of my favorite shrubs, and that is because it has this multi-season interest that I'm trying to show you guys here. Obviously, it has these great big oak-shaped leaves. Then when it's blooming this summer, you're going to get these panicle fluorescences on them. Those will get up to a foot long. And then once you get to the autumn time, that is when you're going to start seeing that's a bright red color. Then common lilac. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with lilac. There are thousands of cultivars of lilac. They come in all different colors and sizes, but I think this is a shrub that can be easy to overlook, and it has a lot of potential in the landscape. That said, this Syringa vulgaris variety right here is what you're seeing on the right. That is the common lilac, and that gets to 20 feet tall and 20 feet wide. So definitely opt for a dwarf variety if you do not have the space for a shrub that's as tall as your house. Staghorn sumac, this is another one that would be a great fall interest. Technically, this is a tree. It can get up to 30 feet tall, but there are dwarf varieties. One that I specifically have worked with is tiger eye sumac. That'll get to be about 5 by 5, and that's much easier to incorporate into a landscape. This plant can be invasive, so you definitely want to pay attention to that. It spreads via rhizomes, so through its roots, it will start shooting up new shoots next to it, and eventually it will try to form clusters of plants. Kansas, it kind of depends on the area where it's super invasive, but it's not on a list yet. There may be, if you're listening from out of state, it may actually be on an invasive species list, and you might not be able to find it. Then roses obviously do great in Kansas. Excuse me. Dehydrating myself. I wanted to specifically pay attention to knockout roses because they are so much less maintenance than your typical teacup rose. With teacups, you have to do a lot of deadheading because they do not drop their flowers. You have to prune them back to keep their form, and then they also have a lot of fungal issues that you're going to run into. So you have to plan on applying fungicides to those. Many varieties of knockout roses. They come in both the single and double flowers. So that's what you're seeing on the left here. They double would be up top, single on the bottom. And then you can find those in reds, yellows, whites, dark pinks, light pinks, and peaches. As I said, these are self-cleaning, so the flowers just drop off and the shrub kind of just takes care of itself. Maintenance-wise with this shrub, all you really need to do is prune out the dead canes about once a year, because some of the branches will fall off. It's just natural. And then maybe shape the plants, but really it doesn't need it. Common smoke tree. So this is one that I've included specifically because of the foliage. It does have a flower. If you look at the bottom left photo, that is what their flower looks like. It's not a typical one, but that's where the smoke comes in. It looks like a little smoke plume. These get vibrant foliage, especially during the early summer, but it kind of keeps throughout the year. And that offers great contrast into a landscape. I have planted this Golden Spirit variety right next to this Royal Purple variety, and it looks awesome. Maintenance-wise with these are very vigorous growers, so don't plan on pruning these and keeping them to a certain size. I learned that the hard way. They will grow and they will get to that 15 feet mark very quickly. I've seen them grow several feet within a year. Then Chinese snowball viburnum. This is a very old shrub. It's been used in landscapes forever. Obviously, it's popular for these big flowers, but there's the minor caveat of it doesn't look very good once the flowers are gone. So I recommend if you decide to use these, it's like some of those other shrubs where you kind of want to incorporate it into the background. So it's interesting part of the year, and then you don't notice it the other part of the year. Then I wanted to talk about spring flowering bulbs, because bulbs are one of the easiest ways to get color, especially into your spring landscapes, obviously. But really, these, you have to water them, maybe fertilize them, and that's all you have to do to take care of them. So let's dive in here. Crocus, you're going to see these blooming very shortly, probably within the next few weeks. They're very small, so what you want to do with these is actually plant them in bunches. You can do single bunches or you do several bunches throughout a lower growing landscape, and that will help incorporate a lot of color. Then you have hyacinth. These will start blooming generally right around when the crocus are either done or sort of towards the tail end of when they're blooming. These are actually pretty large for bulb flowers, especially spring bulb flowers. They get about 1 foot tall and wide. And as you can see, the flower itself is a majority of the plants. So definitely an interesting plant to include in the landscape. There are thousands of varieties of these. The only color that I think I haven't seen a hyacinth in is green, and I'm not even sure that that doesn't exist. So then daffodils you will see blooming around the same time as hyacinth. So if you like to plan your bulbs ahead, you can mix those two together and try to create something interesting. These will get up to 1 foot tall and they'll be in yellows, oranges, pinks, whites, and bicolor varieties. These will also reemerge for you year after year. And so that's one of the perks to these bulbs as opposed to some of the others I'm going to talk about, that you don't have to replant these and they're going to keep coming back with that same vigor, and they might actually keep spreading for you. So that's nice. So tulips, on the other hand, are bulbs that you will have to start to replant year after year because they don't come back with the same vigor. But obviously they're popular because they're large and they've got a lot of color. And again, there are thousands of varieties of these. They do come in doubles and singles. The ones you're seeing on the bottom left here are your doubles. I've planted them before and they look awesome. They kind of emulate rosebuds or rose flowers, excuse me. And then also with your roses, you're going to have different times of bloom depending on your varieties. So you have your early bloomers, which are going to be in March, your mid-season bloomers that are in April, and your late season that are going to be in May. So really, if you buy a bunch of different varieties and plan it out, you can have tulips for basically all of spring. Again, as I mentioned, they're not like tulips. These will not come back as great the second time around. When they perennialize. So you might want to plan on either replacing them or replanting. And then the care for all spring bulbs is generally the same. So I figured I'd just throw it all into one slide here. You want to keep your soil wet, moist, but not wet. If it is wet, your bulbs will probably start rotting. So a good rule of thumb is, if the soil feels wet, but you can't actually squeeze moisture out of it, that's good. And then you want to fertilize your bulbs as the leaves are emerging. You don't want to be fertilizing when the flowers are emerging, because that's actually at that point you're fertilizing for the next year around. The bulb is already going into dormancy at that point. Then along those lines, you want to wait to cut them back if you're trying to perennialize them, because all the carbohydrates that are in the leaves are actually going to be returned to the bulb, which will help the bulb overwinter for you. Then we have more bulbs because not all of them are spring bulbs. There are quite a few summer bulbs that you can incorporate into a landscape. These are the easier ones to maintain that I've decided to include. We have bearded iris here. This is a collector's plant. There's hundreds of varieties. An interesting thing about bearded iris is they like to hybridize. So if you have two varieties planted next to each other and then one gets pollinated by another, you're going to see mixtures of these throughout your garden. Typically with iris, maintenance-wise, what you're going to be doing is trying to separate them every 3 to 4 years. And then you would do that in July. That right after it's done blooming, you just go in, trim back the foliage, and then split up those rhizomes. And Siberian iris is another option. This is for the people that happen to have a wet landscape in their backyard. If you happen to have a pond or a stream or something, this is a great option because it needs moist yet well-drained soil if you can find that. Essentially areas that tend to flood, but then the flood goes away. So these are a little different to bearded iris. As you can see, these are actually one plant in each photo. They get pretty large, 4 feet by 3 feet, several blooms, and then the foliage actually more so resembles a grass than leaves. Then allium are something that I've personally worked with that do great. Um, Specifically the sort of mid-sized varieties. I haven't worked with the bigger ones, but I've seen them and they also grow in Kansas. This is technically an ornamental onion, so be careful with sort of where you plant this, and if you're planning on using it as a cut flower, just know that it might smell. Um, uh, if you have a true allium, it should be edible, but I would not recommend it because they uh, are typically too strong and bitter, and often there are ones that look exactly like it that aren't alliums, and then those are toxic. And then we have our hardy perennials here. Um, yeah, these are going to be your go-tos for sort of your xeriscape or low maintenance flower gardens. So I wanted to get you guys a good variety here as far as color and texture. And let's see what we have. Daylilies. So this is another one that is a collector's plant. Their entire society is devoted to daylilies. There's over 60,000 varieties. And depending on the variety that you have, they can be up to 8 feet tall. Your typical plants are going to be generally around 2 by 2 feet. So it just depends on kind of what you find as far as how it's going to perform in the garden. There are reblooming varieties that you may particularly like because they'll bloom all growing season for you. Perennial salvia is another one that I wanted to include. This is a plant that I have seen completely neglected before, not watered, not fertilized, not taken care of whatsoever, and it still pops up, still sends out a bloom. So definitely something that is hard for you to kill, and even if you do kill it, it'll probably come back. A lot of varieties of salvia, but this purple one is kind of my favorite. That's why I decided to include it here. It gives a lot of great texture. It's a pollinator plant. Maintenance wise, also these will need to be cut back not once but twice a year because after they bloom in June, the inflorescences will turn brown. So you want to cut those out because A, they don't look good, and then B, that'll encourage the plant to bloom again when September comes around. Black-eyed Susan, this is a late summer bloomer. You get this deep yellow color with these, so it's a great option to just get easy color into your garden. It's a great border plant. This will quickly grow to 2 by 2 feet. Maintenance on this, you really just need to cut it back once a year, and then once it's established, actually, you don't need to water it very often. Then we have phlox. Phlox does great in Kansas. The two that I've decided to highlight here are your panicle phlox and your creeping phlox. Your panicle will bloom through July and September, and then your creeping will bloom through April and June. So theoretically, if you were to plan your garden out, you can have these blooming almost the entire growing season for you. Very, very easy color and a lot of colors to choose from. We have Russian sage. This is a borderline shrub. It gets pretty large, but it is also very, very low maintenance. Very little pest and disease issues. It's very cold hardy. So if it gets, extremely low in the winter, wherever you're at, this is a good option. And it's also drought tolerant. In extreme heat, it may need a little bit of extra water, but typically it's fine. Maintenance wise, you do want to cut this back in the fall to control the size. And then try to wear maybe a mask and skin covering when you do that. Because if you have allergies like I do, it's going to irritate your lungs and your skin. Great pollinator plant though. And then with this one, you kind of get what you see. Feathery grass that grows very quickly. You're going to get those blooms within 1 year, and within 2 years, you'll have it being 2 feet tall by 5 feet tall by 2 feet wide. There are no serious pest or disease issues on this. You might see some rust occasionally, but even that doesn't really tend to take out the plants. And then this is a plant that you actually don't want to do anything with before the spring after it blooms. When I say blooms, I mean those seed stalks that you're looking at. This is a great way to incorporate winter interest. So leave it alone, and then early spring, cut it down and encourage that new growth. And hardy pampas grass, if you're looking for an even larger grass, this is a great specimen plant. This will get up to 12 feet tall and 6 feet wide. It's a very vigorous grower. Prefers dry soil, so put it in a spot where it's not typically wet. If you do put it in a moist, sort of fertile spot, it may actually struggle. Maintenance-wise, you're going to want to cut this back once a year. That'll encourage the new growth the next year and keep it from getting too large too quickly. And then every once in a while, maybe every few years, you'll probably want to dig these up and divide them. You just do that by trimming back the foliage. Maybe a little bit of a task to get the crown out of the grounds, but then you just hack the crown into pieces, and each one of those pieces, once planted, will turn into a fully new plant for you. Purple cone flower is a very easy plant to incorporate into the landscape. You kind of, I mean, you could throw seeds of this into your garden. They're going to pop up on their own, and you're going to get flowers. But yeah, it's a full sun plant. It's very easy to grow. It can reach 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. It spreads through its seed drop, actually. So all those bristles that you see at the top of the flowers, once they fall, they're going to start spreading. So keep that in mind if you're putting it in a flower bed where you don't necessarily want it to spread. And then maintenance-wise, these don't look very great throughout the winter, so I'd recommend just cutting them back in the fall. Then stonecrop sedum. All sedums do great in Kansas, but I decided to include these specifically because of your thick foliage that you get, and then these panicles that you get on top. Yeah, they have very fleshy leaves, incredibly cold hardy. So this is another one that will survive in your sort of very extreme low temperatures. And it's great winter interest because those panicles don't go away after the plant dies back in the fall. They kind of just keep their form. So it's a great way to include things to look at throughout the winter. Okay, and then we have butterfly milkweed here. I decided to include this plant just because it is obviously great to look at. There are very bright flowers on these. It is also a great food source for monarchs, which are, as we know, endangered. Both the butterfly and the caterpillar feed off of these. So as far as including beneficial plants into your pollinator gardens, you can't go wrong with this one. And then I wanted to include just sort of, an amalgamation of all these plants together so you guys could get an idea of what it looks like, because there's quite a bit of color that you can throw into your garden without having to choose difficult plants. These are all low water. These are all very easy maintenance. So I see we're at 30 minutes. That means I rushed through my slides. I apologize, but that gives us even more times for questions. So I guess we'll hop on into that and see what you guys want to talk about.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the information on all the different plant materials that we can grow here in Kansas and around the country. I'm going to turn it over now to Cassie, who has been our moderator. Anthony, we've been busily answering a lot of questions behind the scenes while you've been talking. So Cassie, I know there's a few out there yet. Do you want to work with Anthony and wrap up with questions, please?
Yeah, absolutely. That was great, Anthony. I learned a lot, and I am excited to plan my spring landscape now with all those plant pictures you showed. So thank you. Okay, we got a couple questions about Japanese beetles, kind of how to get rid of them, or if there are any shrubs that they stay away from.
I'm not too familiar with Japanese beetles. That's more of a Eastern Kansas issue, unfortunately. That said, I'm sure there's several insecticides that you can use to treat on plants. Maybe that can be answered by other agents in the chat as far as what plants are resistant to them.
Cassie, you don't mind, I might jump in real quick because as Anthony said, it's an Eastern Kansas issue, and here in Johnson County, we deal with it. And there's really no plant that's potentially resistant. They'll feed on over 300 different landscape plants, but I think someone put in the chat box, they love lindens, they love roses, they'll do hardy hibiscus, hollyhock. you know, and they're only a problem for about 4 to 6 weeks and they go away. So I think the best answer is just kind of live with them and renew the plants after they're done feeding in early August and have a great fall with them and just learn to cope with them or treat them.
Okay, I just saw a really good question too. Someone asked that they said they're really bad at plants. Can you name some plants to try that people try to kill and still come back? So what are the thriving plants you would recommend?
Okay, so I'm good at this one. Actually, quite a few of the plants that I just mentioned, even some of the ones that are up on the screen here, your perennial salvia, those I've fully ignored before and ripped out of the ground, and those have popped back up either from seed or from root. I'm not entirely sure, but they will come back if you kill them. You just got to get some water onto them. Also, these coneflower on the right, those are very, very easy to maintain. Really, almost all these plants that we've talked about, they're going to be very easy for you. Another one I can think of would be excuse me, let me go back here real quick. That one, Russian sage, very, very difficult to kill. It will actually spread on you and get kind of invasive. So yeah, you may have to go in and pull out new plants that are forming around it, but it will definitely live and thrive in your garden wherever you put it.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, then we've had some questions about deer eating plants and then rabbits as well. So do you have any suggestions for plants that are kind of resistant to animals or any tips on that?
Mm-hmm. So again, most of the plants that I've mentioned throughout here are deer resistant. Yeah, so I mean, all of these flowers that we've gone through, sedum won't be eaten by deer. I believe your black-eyed Susan, they don't like either. Your phlox, maybe phlox. Your salvia, they will not eat because it is technically in the mint family and it drives them away. Really, if you've got flowers that put off sort of an offensive scent to animals, that is what's going to keep those deer and rabbits out of your garden.
Okay, awesome. Okay, a question is, what is the best plants that grow in a sandy soil? So she said it stays pretty dry, but it's a sandy type of soil.
I think, again, I keep going back to just my list here, but yeah, a lot of these actually do great in sandy soil as well. Your black-eyed Susan specifically, your purple coneflower, your stonecrop sedum. Look for xeriscape plants, low water plants in general, because with sandy soil, you're not going to be able to retain your water very long. It's going to move through that water table pretty quickly.
All right. Then we've had some questions about like dividing and moving plants. Specifically, somebody asked about ornamental grasses, how to divide and move those. And then someone just asked about yucca plants, how to move and divide them. Okay.
So yucca, in my experience, I've dug it up in the middle of summer. I think you can really do it at any time almost, maybe not winter. But you could dig it up and just dig up the entire full crown. Those will actually break apart pretty easily for you. So it's really just a matter of separating the roots. You want to keep little sections of leaves attached to those roots so it can develop new roots, obviously. But really, those will just fall apart after you dig them up. And then as far as grasses, as I was saying, early spring is when you want to aim to dig those up and sort of separate them. You just cut back your foliage, dig up the crown with like a spade shovel, maybe a few inches away from the grass. And then I use either a shovel to cut it up, depending on how big the crown is, or there is a gardening tool called a hori or a Japanese gardening knife that is perfect for dividing. You just go in there and you kind of saw the plants apart. And then depending on how big it is, I mean, you could get chunks that are 4 inches by 4 inches and grow a new plant from it. So.
Okay. So the questions are coming in really fast. I'm trying to keep up with all this.
That's good. We got time.
So we've had a couple questions about plants like not blooming.
Mhm.
I saw one earlier about a daffodil plant not blooming. Someone just said their spirea hasn't been blooming, and lilacs that don't bloom. Any suggestions for how to kind of get them to come into bloom?
Yeah, it depends on the plant that you're looking at. If you're looking at bulbs, it's probably because they've become overcrowded and they need to be separated. So definitely go in there the right time of year and separate those bulbs, and then it should start putting up new shoots for you. The roots just need more room to grow. As far as your shrubs, it's probably a nutrient deficiency if they have bloomed before. Otherwise, you might want to look at water. There could be several factors. So I'd recommend you actually talk to your local extension agent about that, and they can help you sort of diagnose what's wrong with it.
All right. So you answered a question about sandy soil, but now someone says they have clay soil. So what would you suggest that would thrive in a heavier clay soil?
Okay, so definitely look for plants that handle good wet or conditions. I think the one that I mentioned in here was your Siberian iris. Um, Granted, those are bulbs, so there is a risk of those bulbs rotting, but I'd give those a try there. There's also, you might actually look into trees when you're going into some of that. Oh, what tree am I thinking of now? Would you happen to know what I'm talking about, Cassie?
I'm not sure.
It's a swamp tree. It sends up the knees.
Old
Oh,
cypress.
bald cypress.
Bald cypress. Yep. Great option for your wet areas. Um, but yeah, maybe ask your local uh, plant dealerships too what they have that can go in those spots.
Okay. Then I'm going to kind of bushel this question all together, but I've seen quite a few about like pruning and cutting back. Do you have any general suggestions on tips on how to do that with these plants you talked about?
Yeah, so generally, right after they bloom is when you're going to want to go in there and cut them back. That gives them time to grow. A lot of these plants will flower on new growth, so it needs that time period to get that new growth in there to form those buds for the new flowers. Um, it does kind of generally depend on what plant you're looking at, but yeah, just make sure whenever you're pruning that you're not trimming off your flower buds when you're doing it.
Okay. So you talked a lot about perennials and bulbs. Someone in the chat wants to know if you have any favorite annuals that are low maintenance that you recommend.
Yeah. Well, let me think about it for a second.
That's a hard
What are
question.
your
There's a
favorite
lot.
annuals, Cassie?
Ooh. Um, I mean, petunias are very popular. They do really well in full sun. Um, there's lots. I kind of like to just try something new every year. Usually my garden center will have something fun that I can try out. So,
Yeah. One of my favorites is actually sweet potato vine. It obviously doesn't flower, but it's a great way to incorporate color. And if you plant it into a landscape as opposed to in a pot, it will get pretty large for you, depending on how often you water it. Trying to think of flowering annuals. Um, you know, not a flowering annual, but coleus is also a great option to get some great color in there. That's more of a shade plant, so you'll want to pay attention to where it's going in. Um, uh, yeah.
okay, somebody wants to know about fertilizing. What do you recommend they use?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. You're going to want to know kind of what the composition of your soil is. Your extension office can actually help you help facilitate a soil test to know what your soil kind of needs for plants to grow. But if you wanted to go with sort of a general use, I would recommend sort of a low rate fertilizer that has equal nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So you'd be looking at your like 13, 13, 13 or below, and then just kind of following the label directions as far as application.
All right. Someone is wanting to plant these flowers and shrubs maybe close to their vegetable garden. do you have any tips on, they don't want the nutrients to be taken away from the veggies? Just some things about that, maybe spacing.
Um, think it probably depends on what kind of vegetables you're growing. Some of them have wider root systems than others. I'd say maybe keep it, 2 to 3 feet away. I don't think it's going to affect it very much.
Okay. Well, we're getting through a lot in the Q&A. Let me see if there's anything I've kind of missed. Okay, somebody says they have lots of shade. There's 2 large pecan trees that shade their landscape. What do you suggest for that?
As far as plants, yeah.
I believe that's what they want, yeah.
So hostas would be a great option. There are a few, shade bulbs as well. I think lily of the valley would be a great flower to throw in there. Just know that it's a neurotoxin. So if you got like kids around there, you definitely don't want to plant that. Look for your wider leaved plants there. Your garden centers will have full sort of shade sections to look through. I know in the east side of the state, you might be able to get like a stilby to thrive. Also, I won't grow here in Western Kansas, but I think hostas would be a great option because you can get tons of varieties.
Okay. And I just wanted to throw out something real quick. We've had some very specific questions, and then I just saw a question about the Master Gardener program. So I just wanted to let everyone know that a good way to get those questions answered would be to contact your local extension agent. And you can find that on the K-State Research and Extension website. So they would know all that information if your county has a local Master Gardener program and help you with those specific needs. All right, so let me take another look.
I just want to say while I'm here, I realized I was kind of choking in the beginning there. I apologize to everybody. My notes got completely messed up here on my end, so I was kind of trying to remember everything I was trying to talk about.
That's okay. I think you got everyone very excited for spring because we have lots of questions, and I think people are excited to start planting their gardens. So, okay. We have, do you have any thoughts on Rose of Sharon? I don't know if that was one you mentioned or not.
Right. So I didn't mention that one because I've seen some pretty harsh dieback of it. It does grow well in Kansas, but if you get those, particularly falls where you get those harsh temperature drops and the plant hasn't had a chance to go into dormancy yet, you're going to get significant dieback in your plant because the sap basically ruptures your stems. It is pretty easy to take care of. If you put it in a sheltered spot, that'll get 12 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and there's a lot of varieties and options there for you, and it's an excellent pollinator plant as well.
Okay. This question just came across. What plants do you recommend to help the bees?
To help the bees. Okay. Well, all of these pollinator plants that I've kind of mentioned, especially, really anything that's got a flower to it is going to help the bees, but especially the ones that have a lot of flowers to it. Specifically, let me go through here. Your Russian sage would be a great option because you've got so many flowers there. Phlox would probably be a good option too. Really, all of these. This perennial salvia you'll see covered in pollinators. And then even going into our shrubs way back when here, if I can find them. Van Hoot spirea, great option. And then, yeah, your bluebeard and your butterfly bush. Obviously these plants that could just get covered in flowers, your bees are going to find their way to them.
Okay, well, we made it through most of the questions in the Q&A. So I think we're going to go ahead and end it. And again, if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to your local extension agent. They're a great resource for you. So okay, I don't know if Dennis wants to.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to hang on here a second. Yeah, so once again, I want to thank Anthony for his time today in joining us on the K-State Garden Hour with his informative information on plants. I know it got me excited for spring. And the weather today, I think almost across most of Kansas is spring-like weather. Also want to thank Cassie for being our moderator today. I think there was over 50 or close to 50 questions that came in the Q&A box alone, let alone what came in the chat. So thank everyone for being so engaged in the program. And once again, this session has been recorded. I expect a link to be coming to you in your email that will have a evaluation for today's session and also information on the upcoming session. The next one's on pruning in mid-March. So once again, thanks for joining us on the K-State Garden Hour. Don't hesitate to reach us at ksuemg@ksu.edu and or contact your local extension office and we'll be glad to help you out. Enjoy spring. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you for joining us.